all for having me. Not an easy thing to follow to share such a good public speaker, but I'll do my best here. My name is Bonnano. We are smack dab in the middle of hurricane season, really haven't even reached our peak yet, and I want to talk a little bit about that here today. Obviously, we are quite familiar with hurricanes, tropical storms in our area. So just briefly, one sec. Is Nancy here? Okay, just a little bit about me. I see the Florida Tech sign back there. I am a proud graduate of Florida Tech. I got my bachelor's in environmental science and meteorology option. If you see me on the street, I'll tell you my degrees in meteorology. Also got my master's degree there in communication. And I have wrote a weekly weather column at Florida Today. I've also done some live and tape broadcasts both for Space Coast Daily and the Viera Voice as well. This isn't working. I just did it on that.
You got it.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we have had, as perhaps longtime residents know here, we have had some pretty hard hits from not only some hurricanes, but also tropical storms as well. This is my unofficial list. Unofficial, it's debatable, of the top 5 hardest hits here in the county. I went with Hurricane Gene in 2004. That was the second, really, of the 2 hurricanes we were hit with as our hardest hit. We all remember Tropical Storm Faye, longtime residents, that really showed us that tropical storms can also do quite a bit of damage as well, bringing so much flooding to our area. Hurricane David in 1979, which basically was a Category 1 that essentially paralleled our coast. Hurricane Irma in 2017, that landfalled way in southwest Florida. We were on the wrong side of the storm, the right front quadrant, so we got a pretty good shot there. And Hurricane Francis in 2004, which was the first storm that hit us. It didn't really seem fair that we got 2 storms in 3-4 weeks, did it? But that's the way it worked out for us. And fortunately, we didn't get a direct hit from either, but as you can see there with Gene, we were obviously close enough to get some pretty good impacts from it. We have seen our fair share of storms. This is every storm, every classified storm. You can't even see the state of Florida, I bet. But this is every classified storm that's come within 100 miles of our area in recorded history, which goes back basically to the 1850s. Look at all that. There's a reason we are synonymous. I think when you think of hurricanes, and you say think of a state that's synonymous with hurricanes, the first state you're going to think of is Florida, and this is why. There's just a spaghetti string here of tracks all going throughout the state, but we have been insanely lucky here in Brevard County. We have a coastline of over 70 miles here in Brevard County. I took all those tracks that you saw before, and I only did the major hurricanes that have come. And you can see we have never, and this is hard for me to believe, it's hard for a lot of people to believe, we have never had a major hurricane make landfall in Brevard County. That's incredible. When you think about where we are, the vulnerable side of the coast there, such a long piece of land, never had it, right? So, you know, when we talk about our hardest hits, I'm going with Gene there for 2004. Having said that, our luck may not last forever. We hope it does, but we need to prepare as though it won't. We've had some close calls here, certainly. We remember Hurricane Matthew here. Came within about 20 miles of Brevard County. The center did. This center got really close. It was a Category 4 storm as it approached. We also had Hurricane Dorian. This was a bit of a monster here when you think about it. Got to a Category 5 storm in the Bahamas. We know what damage it did in the Bahamas. At one point was projected to make landfall in Florida, but we got very fortunate, as we did with Matthew. We were on the western side of the storm, which means anytime you're on the western side of the storm, you're on the weaker side of the storm, that's where you want to be. So when we talk about Matthew and Dorian, those storms, they passed closer to us than, say, Gene and Francis did. Those made landfall by the Port St. Lucie, or the St. Lucie County, Martin County area This passed closer to us, but we got less because we were on the quote-unquote weaker side of the storm. The storm also had weakened a little bit over the Bahamas as well. And then, of course, Hurricane Floyd. You have to go way back for Hurricane Floyd, but I was here for this. This was a monster of a storm. I got a graphic here that shows just how scary this storm was. On the right was Hurricane Andrew. That's in 1992. We all know what Hurricane Andrew did. Made landfall in Homestead, obviously devastated that community. That was a tiny little storm compared to Hurricane Floyd. That was a monster of a storm. That was essentially Dorian, for those of you who weren't here. And this prompted, at the time, the biggest evacuation in the southeast. But we were very, very lucky once again getting that seemingly lucky last-minute turn to the north, really, really saving us. But there's going to be a time at some point when we're not going to get so lucky, and we need to be prepared for that again. To continue our luck, look how many storms we used in 2020. We had 30 storms. That's unheard of. We flew through all the names there. We went right through all the hurricane names. We went into the Greek alphabet. We went to iota. In fact, we had a major Hurricane Eta make landfall in Louisiana. This season in 2020 was so transformative that they're not using the Greek alphabet for names anymore. They are going to come up with an alternative name if we're unfortunate enough to go through all of our primary names again. So this season was historic, easily the busiest hurricane season ever, and we weren't bothered, were we? Isaias threatened us, but that never really had its act together, and certainly wasn't on the level of a Dorian or a Matthew or anything like that. So for all the 30 storms we had last year, we got lucky, but again, we've got to prepare as though our luck one day is going to run out. And just some statistics again to sort of back that up. Again, 30 named storms, 11 of those storms made landfall on the U.S. coastline, and 4 in Louisiana. Especially if you lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana, Southwest Louisiana, you got 2 major hurricanes in a year, including Laura, which was a Category 4. And then you had Eta, which I referenced earlier, a major hurricane making landfall in November with a Greek letter. You just have to think at that point, you know, somebody's got it out for us here. 7 major hurricanes. The average season has 3, and we had 14 hurricanes. So an incredible season. Are we going to duplicate that this year? Let's hope not. Currently, the forecast is for somewhere just shy of 20 named storms. We are lucky right now in that there is Saharan dust in the the Atlantic that's really helping to tamp down everything with respect to our tropical storms and cyclones and hurricanes. But that's going to change here in rapid fashion. Our hurricane forecasting is really, really, really improving. This storm, this is Elsa from a couple weeks ago. This is the first forecast made for Elsa, right when it just started going. And where did it end up? Exactly where they said it would, right? It was a tropical storm right off the coast of Southwest Florida, made landfall in the Big Bend. They nailed it. They basically nailed the intensity. I know it briefly went to a hurricane, but they nailed it for our sake. This is 5-6 days beforehand. Our track forecasting has gotten so good that the scuttlebutt is that next year we're going to go to 7-day forecast instead of 5. So that is something to watch out for. That may open a little bit of Pandora's box, but that's still something that is in the offing there. So that's exciting and shows how much the track forecasts have improved. The intensity forecasts are a different matter altogether. This is what was at the time Tropical Storm Michael. And we know Michael became a Category 5 hurricane and made landfall just east of Panama City. Mexico Beach was obviously devastated by that. But the initial forecast here, a few days beforehand, had it made landfall as a Category 1. And as you can see, courtesy of this track from floridadisaster.org, it came in, they made it after the fact, a Category 5 hurricane. So the intensity forecast, and I talked with Ken Graham, who's the director of the National Hurricane Center, talked with Phil Klotzbach, who is the lead forecaster at Colorado State, which provides the big hurricane forecast each year. And they'll tell you the intensity is way off, but the track itself is pretty good. So we've got a ways to go in that regard, but certainly you got to feel pretty good about how far our tracks have come in well, gosh, even really 10, 15 years, I'd say. And again, Dorian's forecast is an example of that. We take a look here. This was the initial forecast for Dorian, right? The track forecast is pretty good. Took it in our general direction. But look, it comes in as a tropical storm. That's because models have a really hard time with respect to land interaction. In other words, this storm was not properly forecast with respect to land interaction and also some shear as well. Obviously, instead of a tropical storm in our area, we got this monster, which was, as we mentioned, it ended up being a Category 5 storm. Absolutely devastated Great Abaco, Grand Bahama. Those poor people there. Fortunately, we got off pretty easy, relatively speaking, here. Our 2021 Atlantic Tropical Cyclone names, we are already through 5 of these. You know, we had Elsa from a few weeks ago. So now our next name is going to be Fred, and then we go on and on and on. And let's hope we don't get through all of these this year. The names are came up with by the World Meteorological Organization. It's not the National Hurricane Center. They decide whether a name is retired or not. A name is retired if it does essentially a lot of damage or is particularly noteworthy. So Katrina, you'll never see another Katrina. Andrew, Dorian, etc. So some of these names are replacements on here thus far. We've only had one hurricane, which is Elsa, and that was only briefly. Everything else has been a tropical storm. We're going to hope that we can keep it like that. But we know as we continue throughout the season, the peak of our hurricane season is early to mid-September. So we're getting there, and really we're going to ramp up as we get towards August. And again, just a look, we're looking at, and this is probably on the low side at this point, given we've already had 5 storms, but 13 to 20 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, 3 to 5 major hurricanes. We are hoping that we can stay shy of where we were last year. Last year we had something that was called La Nina, and La Nina basically means that we're going to have not a lot of shear in the Atlantic Basin, which is good for the hurricanes to develop. This year it's more of a neutral environment, so there may be a little bit more shear, and hopefully we'll keep the storms down. There is a chance that La Nina comes back in September and October, but for now, we're going to hope that that's okay. It's a big thing. You never think that the slight warming or cooling of the waters in the Pacific Ocean, the equatorial Pacific Ocean, matters. But it matters everything here. If you hear El Nino, there's a really good chance that we're not going to have an active hurricane season, but we will have an active severe season with respect to tornadic threat in the winter. So it's kind of, you know, pick your poison, I suppose. But we're looking at a neutral season here so far with the possibility of getting to La Nina later on in the year. So the biggest threats from tropical cyclones. Storm surge is really, really the big thing, right? We a lot of times gravitate towards this idea that wind can huff and puff and blow our houses down. And of course there can be wind damage. By far the deadliest threat and the costliest threat comes from storm surge. And obviously we've built so much along our coastline. That's why, you know, everybody gets off the Barrier Island when there's a hurricane coming here. A wall of water is not something that should be trifled with, obviously. So, you know, I think emergency management officials really hammering that in is a good thing. The winds obviously are a factor. You know, you don't want to be in a mobile home, for instance, if you're under a hurricane warning. Rainfall, we know that from Faye, right? We got over 20 inches of rain in some places in Faye. And tornadoes. You may have noticed this a couple weeks ago with Elsa. A lot of tornado warnings popped up because the peninsula was on the right side of the storm. Your tornadoes will be in the right front quadrant. With, for instance, Matthew and Dorian, we were on the left-hand side, so I think in Dorian we had 1 tornado warning, and I'm not positive anything touched down on that. It was down near Sebastian Inlet. So, take-home message on that is we want to be on the left side of the storm. How to prepare? Make sure you have needed supplies. You know, obviously there's batteries, non-perishable food. Prepare as though the power is going to be out a week. That's a really, really good thing to say. And if you get luckier than that, great. Bottled water, all those things. Hopefully, you know, if we're, you know, any sort of tenure here, you know by now what to get. At least that's my hope. New forecast tracks. This is really important. because when a hurricane or tropical storm threatens an area, they will go, the National Hurricane Center will issue tracks every 3 hours instead of 6. But they don't change the track every 3 hours, they change the track every 6. So that's important to note. So they'll change it basically on the 11s and the 5s. And listen, I should say listen to emergency management officials. My apologies there, as we discussed. And yeah, COVID-19 is something to have in mind when you're making plans. You know, for instance, if your plan is to go to a shelter, well, there's obviously going to be a lot of people there. So there's, you know, something you got to keep in mind. Perhaps you have someone immunocompromised in your family or something of that nature. But certainly something good to keep in mind. And the bottom line is, don't be scared. Don't be scared of hurricanes. Don't be scared of tropical storms. You know, if you do, you know, you listen to emergency management officials, you'll be just fine. And I think that's sometimes something we get caught up in when you see a hurricane come towards us. And it's obviously easy to listen to the media. Lord knows I've been part of the media before, and sometimes get a little scared. But it's important just to remain calm, and all will be well. And something else I want to point out here, we talked about storm surge. You can find your storm surge area on well, your emergency management site, but you can also find it on the National Hurricane Center or NOAA website here. And this sort of illustrates the storm surge threat, if you will. So it may be hard to see for some of you in the back, but the red and the yellow and is really where you're going to see a great amount of storm surge. Now, I've turned this up here to a Category 5, but you can see the areas that are vulnerable in the event of a hurricane coming our way. The good news is, even though we are vulnerable, we're not as vulnerable as some areas in Florida. For instance, the Tampa Bay area and Dade County as well. Very, very low-lying areas there. We have a little bit of an advantage there, but you can obviously see in a Category 5 hurricane, we would see the Barrier Islands essentially swept over, and very, very tiny parts of the mainland as well. But I don't believe anybody in the mainland area really has to compartmentalize storm surge at this point, but just know where you are. And again, this information is all available online to you, not only on the National Hurricane Center NOAA website, but also Brevard County Emergency Management can have that information for you as well. I also want to acknowledge again NOAA, the National Weather Service in Melbourne, FloridDisaster.org, NOAA.com for helping me get this information together. And any questions, I wanted to make sure I got through that real quick because I know we're on a tight schedule here, like a lot of great speakers today. Nobody? Okay. Thank you all so much.